Authority, Hong Kong, China, and Mr. Charles Cowling, President-elect, International Actuarial Association. Can we give the gentlemen a hand as they are coming to the podium? Let's give them a hand until they sit. Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. We've had 4 sessions of very, very interesting and thought-provoking presentations and indeed questions and answers. But this one's going to be even better. So what we're now doing is we're turning our attention, I suppose, to those who have responsibility for the pension funds. Now, different countries have different structures. We have trusts, we have foundations, sometimes we have companies. But what's common in all cases is there is somebody who has a responsibility for the outcomes of the pension savings. And in particular, what we're going to be addressing in this session is, I'm going to call them trustees, but I realise in different countries it won't necessarily be that, but those who have a fiduciary responsibility for the oversight of the pension fund. And I think the reason we have pension funds, and this has come up a few times already, the reason we have pension funds is because individuals don't have the time, don't have the resources, don't have the confidence, don't have the knowledge to manage their own pension savings. That is the raison d'etre of a pension fund. So obviously those who run the pension fund on their behalf must be able to fulfill all those shortcomings, let me call it, that we as individuals have. So they must know more, they must be more committed, they must have access to advice. And the question that those of us who are regulators face is whether people in these positions meet those standards. And what we're going to be dealing with here is, if they don't, what should the regulator do? And this is no disrespect in any way to those who do run pension funds. It's often a very thankless task. In many situations, it's done on a voluntary basis. But unfortunately, you know, your willingness to contribute your time, your concerns, your willingness sometimes to, or your readiness to take responsibility is not enough. Pension funds need expertise and knowledge and experience to be run properly. So we have three presentations. 2 of the presentations from Australia and from Hong Kong, China are going to look at the specific approach adopted by the regulators in those countries. And then the 3rd presentation is going to be a change of direction, which is more covering what can be done to support the trustees in their task. So our first presentation is from Wayne Fogarty from APRA. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Brendan. And it's very handy not having to move the mic too far. Another person that's as short as me. Before I start, I'd just like to thank our gracious hosts for putting on such an amazing event. I really appreciate that, and I'd also like to thank IOPS and the OECD for inviting us to present on this really interesting and exciting topic to talk about, knowing that this is something we're definitely facing into across all jurisdictions, and it's not an easy challenge, and it's something that is really important to get right. So I'll just first start by having a bit of a conversation about what we've been doing in APRA for the last few years in relation to trying to improve our trustee skills and capabilities and decision making. APRA's had a pretty strong focus on delivering member outcomes, so we've been really focused on trying to get trustees to turn their mind to delivering for their members. In that context, we've been working and ramping up the work for a number of years, and in 2020, I'd say it was sort of a pivotal putting a marker in the sand in relation to sort of how we want to go and progress forward on this through the introduction and the commencement of our first Prudential Standard on Member Outcomes, which is a strategic planning and member outcomes standard. So that standard is really focused on trying to get trustees to really start thinking about their strategic planning, what they're trying to deliver to their members and how they're going to deliver to their members. As well as actually making sure the members are at the forefront of all their decision-making processes. So when I'm sort of talking in the context of skills and capabilities, I think it's also important to sort of recognise we need to shape the decision-making process as trustees as well. So that Prudential Standard has been very effective in its own right, but at the same time as us introducing that Prudential Standard, APRA also took a very strong, constructively tough approach to our supervision of our trustees. So what we've really done is use the Prudential Standard plus the supervisors really engaging with trustees in a meaningful and a challenging way to trustees to sort of really hold them to account about the way they're thinking about planning and what they're trying to deliver to their members and how they can justify that they're actually delivering. And in that context and the broader context is how they're actually going to deliver unless they have the skills, capabilities and decision-making processes correctly. So really sort of saying, if you really want to progress down this path, what skills are you going to need as a trustee to really deliver? And do you have those skills? And if you don't have those skills, what are you doing to fix the gap, as well as the capabilities? So that's sort of a bit of a backdrop of what we've been doing. We note sort of here in the next part of the slide is that since 2020, we've also seen some significant changes in the operating environment for trustees. This is off the back of a number of initiatives done by both government and APRA to really try and strengthen that member outcomes role and, like I said, ramping up the member outcomes decision-making of trustees. They've all been really positive, which is good. It means we've had significant change, but at the same token, it means we probably need to adapt and be agile in what we need to do going forward, which I'll probably cover off on the next couple of slides. But probably just calling out those few initiatives there, we've really seen an uptick in the way that trustees think about performance of the products to which they're providing to their members, both through APRA's heat maps, which is a comprehensive understanding of the product's performance, with annual performance tests, which is a government initiative that really bites those trustees that actually have products that aren't meeting the level of performance that's required from the Australian government. And that's really driven a really good outcome for members in that space. The government also introduced into Parliament a piece of legislation that does a number of things, but one particular thing it does is increases the level of member best interest duty to become an interest duty in relation to the financial interest provided to members. The inclusion of the word financial is sort of an interesting conversation at the time, but really what it's trying to do is actually say it's about making sure the members get the best financial outcome you can, and what does that mean about your fund expenditure? You shouldn't be spending money that's not yours. It's the members' money unless you've got a justifiable reason to do so to make sure you can deliver the best outcomes you can for them in retirement. So it's a pretty significant step the government introduced, and it's been really beneficial in the context of conversations with trustees as well. And then finally, something that's dear to my heart because I used to manage it for a while, is a super data transformation project, which is something APRA has been doing, which is, has 3 phases. We've actually completed the first phase, which actually collects all the data we need to actually really interrogate those expenses. We've actually got expenses now to such a granular level that we can actually really test trustees and actually ask the tough questions. You've got some money in promotions here. What is that promotion for? How do you justify that promotion? Is it actually delivering for your members, or is it something that you're doing for a different reason? So that's really helped in that context, as well as giving us all the data to run the performance test. The second two phases of that project, which we haven't completed yet, we've just started, actually looking to getting data about non-financial risks. So that will actually cover GCRA, and so governance, accountability, culture and remuneration, as well as other aspects of trustees' operations, which will give us another way to actually really test and interrogate trustees in relation to the way they think and how they're going to deliver for their members. And finally, at the bottom of this slide, the government also introduced an income retirement covenant to really try and encourage trustees to really push into the retirement market. In the Australian system, most trustees sort of finish it at the accumulation phase and they pass it over to the member to either go to a minimum drawdown product or actually fend for themselves to a large degree. The government's really focused on trying to get people to step up to the plate and actually have really good retirement outcomes in our system. So in light of all those changes and all the positive changes we've seen, APRA is looking to respond. So we've got some really good traction in the marketplace, and we're actually seeing trustees actually really delivering in the context of thinking about how they should be operating and how they should get the skills and capabilities to achieve what they're setting out to achieve. But we want to actually take it further. These positive outcomes have led to us to a position where we can actually do more. In that context, what we're looking to do is actually to turn that strategic planning and member outcomes standard into like the core standard, so the centrepiece or the cornerstone of the prudential framework for our trustees. By doing that, what we can sort of do is really leverage off the fact that trustees need to think about strategic planning and member outcomes up front. I'll discuss a bit more in the next slide. The second part of this element is obviously looking at the prudential standard that we have and making enhancements to that prudential standard to sort of reflect on the changes we've seen already. Won't go through this slide in a meaningful way, but really what we're trying to do is essentially the benefits we got from the member outcomes, from the performance test and heat maps. We really want to make sure, as trustees realise they're not performing, if they're transferring members to a different product, to make sure we've got the right risk conversation happening and to make sure members are actually being dealt appropriately. Looking at the fund expenditure, like I indicated, really making sure they're actually using member money in the right way. And then the last part of this changes to the prudential standard is actually getting some intel back from frontline supervision, which point out there were some issues around the management of financial resources, potentially, particularly in relation to reserving practices of trustees. So there's a bit of a question on how they're using the reserves. So we're actually trying to cover off on that in the prudential standard as well. So I won't go into this slide at all in any great detail. What it really just clearly shows is by having the member outcomes standard as the pinnacle standard, the way trustees think about it means that everything should go through that lens. But there's some key standards that fall under that in the Australian system, which is that to deliver the outcomes you need to think about your investments. We've got an investment governance standard. In the Australian system, we offer insurance, and making sure you've got the right insurance tailored for your members. And then finally, in the Australian system, there's a lot of outsourcing of material service providing materials such as administration systems and custodian services. So they're the real three key elements that push into that standard. There's actually 40 prudential standards that apply in the Australian system. I was going to list them all out, but it would have taken a significantly large slide. I know Ali doesn't like slides, so I didn't want to go there in a meaningful way. But what it sort of really points to is all of them are just as important as each other. There's not a case of that they aren't. What it's really trying to do is actually train trustees to actually always look through that strategic initiative sort of and thinking space, think about what they're trying to deliver for their members, put their members first, and then put the hat on and saying, well, how do we actually do all these other steps in the prudential framework to give effect to that? That's really important for improving skills and capabilities. If a trustee is trying to deliver a particular outcome, do they have the skills and capabilities to be able to deliver that outcome? And if they don't, what are they doing in their planning process to do so? So that's really fundamental to what we're trying to do here. So now I'll just turn to a broader bucket of things we're doing in the context of superannuation funds or pension funds with trustees, and turn to our cross-industry type work. So in APRA, we actually regulate banks, insurers and superannuation funds. So we have sort of tailored teams that look at individual areas, but at the same token, we have these cross-industry concepts as well. And the cross-industry concepts essentially apply to everybody in the marketplace. So in this context, more recently we've discovered that we've recognised there's a number of issues in the context of failure of risk controls we're seeing. These are really, in most instances, sort of more connected to cyber breaches, so cyber attacks, which everybody obviously has been facing into that across the globe for a number of years, and we're starting to see a really increased steady pace in the Australian context as well on that. So recognising those sorts of issues and how we want to get ahead of the curve in relation to really trying to make sure we don't have those problems. So as such, our cross-industry team that works with us sort of went, and the specialists in the operational risk area, come up with our new prudential standard in relation to operational risk management. And really what it's doing is it's aimed as pushing trustees and other entities into getting ahead of the curve, actually really thinking about what could go wrong, how they can actually mitigate those things going wrong, so they can really manage operational risks and respond to business disruptions, which is a pretty critical area for everybody. Probably just leave it there, but obviously there's extra parts on that slide, but it's really trying to get the trustees to think forward and actually really be positioning themselves for the right outcomes for their members. Now I'll turn to the financial accountability regime, which actually just received passage through the Australian Parliament about a month ago. The financial accountability regime is a new regime that extends off the back of a previous regime that we had in accountability for banks. It actually is the outcome of a recommendations and findings from a Royal Commission that was held in Australia into misconduct in the banking, superannuation and financial system sector. So there was concerns through that Royal Commission that there was a lot of misconduct that existed, and that there was concerns on how that sort of played through. The Commissioner, the Royal Commissioner at the time, got a lot of feedback from a lot of people throughout industry sort of saying that we really want to get rid of misconduct within the industry, we really need to be stronger on accountability. So obviously the recommendations coming back from the Commissioner was that we need to really introduce this financial accountability regime. So like I said, just recently in the last month, we actually introduced that regime. What the regime really does is sets out a code of conduct and financial consequences for people that don't meet that conduct in relation to accountable persons. Accountable persons is defined in the law, which can be a bit subjective, but generally speaking, it captures all directors and most senior executives. So it's just who's accountable for what functions within the entity. By catching those people, it's sort of putting the emphasis on them to make sure, and there's a positive obligation for them to take reasonable steps to make sure that nobody's contraventing the law. So essentially it's trying to get those accountable people to be really vigilant in relation to potential misconduct. That's actually a shared responsibility between us as the Prudential Regulator and our colleagues at ASIC, so the Australian Securities Investment Commission, as a conduct regulator, to sort of come together and work through those systems, as well as having a joint register for those accountable people. So accountable people apply to banks already in a way. BEAR's being extended, so banks will be captured, and there's a slight few variations to the new regime, but insurers and superannuation funds will be coming in the next couple of years. So once that's embedded, we'll start seeing some really good outcomes from that particular piece of work. A bit more about FAR, but really going into the remuneration conversation, is that FAR, like I indicated, has financial consequences, and one of those is in relation to REM. So under the FAR, essentially, if anybody gets variable REM with it as a responsible person, that variable REM, 40% of it has to be deferred for a period of 4 years. Off the back of that deferral, if anybody fails to meet their obligations under the FAR regime, their actual deferred remuneration gets reduced to the extent proportional to the fact they failed to comply. So there's actually some real teeth in relation to people not doing the right thing, and actually some of their remuneration can be cut back. While that sort of plays out across all the other industries in the Australian system, the only people that really receive variable REM are the investment side of the marketplace. So while it will have a difference in superannuation or in the pension system in Australia, it's not a significant thing at this stage, but it actually will stop bad behaviour happening or being entrenched into the system if that process and variable REM becomes more holistic across all entities. Off the back of that too, we've also, in November 21, we released our Prudential Standard on remuneration. That comes fully into effect from next year. In the meantime, we've been working with trustees to implement the requirements under that Prudential Standard as part of that process. So it's sort of like a implementation stage we're currently in. Through that implementation stage, we've been conducted a review on what people are doing in relation to their REM to see what sort of aspects are flowing through and how it's all going. The results with that were pretty positive in some respects. So we found some early signs of improvement and people actually think about remuneration correctly to try and address the concerns around conflicts of interest and things like that. And what was really positive was you actually did start seeing boards really engage with the remuneration process, which wasn't really a function of a factor we saw previously. And we started seeing people think about remuneration connected to risks and outcomes from risk events in reflecting on their remuneration structures. So there's some really good positives, but like I've got in this slide, I shouldn't use white font, I've noticed in my slides, you can't really read them. But anyway, so we also noticed there was a bit of a gap and there was some areas where trustees weren't quite stepping up to the plate. Like I said, there was issues around potential conflicts of interest not being managed effectively or reflected appropriately, and other aspects of that as well. During the time from the end of the review until now, our risk team that specialises in remuneration has been working pretty closely with trustees to ensure that they're going to be in a good position to land the remuneration process once it fully comes into effect. So we're actually, while we've seen some initial steps, we're actually in a pretty confident position to make sure that everybody actually has a really good remuneration process going forward. I've only got a minute, so I'll be quick. Governance, culture, remuneration, accountability. I've already sort of covered most of this. But as we all agree, governance is a significant driver in the outcomes for members at a number of different levels, as well as risk management. We've always placed a really strong focus on those two elements. And we continue to do so, and we've done a lot of work for a number of years around a couple of key elements of governance. Board tenure, board independence and board capability, as well as diversity on boards. We've actually had some really good step change in the quality of diversity on boards. We actually are getting independence, not just of chair, but independence of mind in the decision-making process as boards. And the biggest challenge we're probably facing at the moment is actually board tenure. We still have a lot of members on boards that have been there for a significant number of years that we really need to try and get out of the system. We've had a few successes more recently, but we're still facing into that as a big challenge. And the last couple of points on that is really where we've gone is when we've adapted our new frameworks in the context of our supervision approach, we've actually called out GCRA as a significant area that supervisors should look at to ensure that they're being very vigilant in the space. So that's it for the presentation. Probably just make a note that, like I sort of indicated at the start, the way we sort of come from an Australian perspective is it's really about, number one, setting out the requirements and working with trustees to get those requirements right in the first place, but then really having that supervision approach of constructively tough. Using data, using our insights to actually really hold trustees to account to say, are you doing what you said you were going to do? Are you achieving what you wanted to achieve? And if not, why not? And how are you going to go forward from that, particularly in relation to skills and capabilities? We need to make sure we get that right. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to you, Brendan.
Thanks, Wayne. It's very interesting. Our next speaker, Mr. Yanqi Cheng from Hong Kong, China. Over to you.
I hope I know how to operate this. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Good afternoon. And it's always good to speak at this sort of forum because we will be able to share our experience with you and also to listen to your feedback with a view to enhancing each other's capability in supervision and regulations of the pension space. Without further ado, I would proceed to introduce some background. For those who have listened to my introduction at the technical meeting, bear with me. I have to repeat this because I believe some of you may not have heard about these basic features of our mandatory provident fund system in Hong Kong. For your background, Hong Kong is a special administrative region of China. We are a city of 7.5 million people, and about 3 million are employees. They are workings, but we have a total population of scheme members of 4.7 million, which is about 2/3. The reason being some of them may not be working continuously, but they are still keeping their MPF accounts. So our system basically is to provide basic retirement protection for the employees, for the workers, and it is mandatory. It is a Pillar 2 arrangement under the World Bank recommendation. It is privately managed. The government doesn't manage it. The government only set up the MPFA, the MPF authority, to regulate and supervise the system, to supervise the trustees. So it is privately managed under trust. And it is a defined contribution arrangement. It is also fully funded, meaning it is financially sustainable. In other words, we don't have to rely on whether government have money or not, because all the money contributed will be in that person's account. Nobody can touch it because it is under safe custody of the trustees. so you make contribution and you accumulate the sum in your account. It is employment-based. In other words, we don't look after those who are not working. So the scheme is basically, the MPF system is basically to look after the workers, for those who work, and they are all compelled to join the scheme. And if anyone not joining would be subject to legal sanction. There will be legal consequences. And under the arrangement, the employer would choose the scheme, and then the employees would choose the fund. So that is the arrangement. And it is the decentralized administration, because as I will show on the next slide, you can see that the operation of the MPF system, under the system, we have a total of 26 schemes being operated by 13 trustees. So it is decentralized, and the trustees will look after scheme administration, fund administration, investment, and also custodian. And well, as I said earlier, employers, and self-employed persons, they choose a scheme, they participate in the scheme, and then the employers choose the schemes while the employees choose the funds. Under each schemes, we would usually have an average of a total of 12 funds, usually divided into 6 broad types: the money market fund, equity funds, bond funds, guarantee funds, and conservative fund, and so on. Basically, each scheme would have 6 broad categories of funds for the members to choose from. And I mentioned earlier that we have this EMPF platform project, which will take over the scheme administration. So even if we have taken over the scheme administration, this trustee would have to look after fund administration and investment management and also custodian arrangement. So there are a lot of work for the trustees to do, and we rely on the trustees to make sure that scheme members' interests are well protected. Now, good governance of MPF trustees is extremely important, because with good governance, we could minimize the problem between trustees and the scheme participants. And as a result, we believe that this would improve performance of the trustees in their services and products, and also we would also on our part, it would reduce the need for us to institute a lot of prescriptive regulations to impose this or that on the trustees. In other words, it would facilitate our supervision. So all of this, I think good governance would be to ensure, to facilitate the trustees to better discharge their fiduciary duties. Primarily is to protect and act in the best interest of scheme members. Now, we begin working on this governance matter very actively and seriously since the year 2018, that is about 5 years ago. We formulate or set up this governance charter for the MPF trustees, and the charter would prescribe everything, and we required all the MPF trustees to pledge to follow the governance charter. I still remember, 5 years ago in 2018, all of the 13 trustees have been asked to stand on the stage and holding a plaque with the governance charter, and in front of them will be all the media taking pictures, showing them that they pledge to follow the governance charter. And the governance charter, the basic value is, we also highlight the core values in delivering the services. You can see from this slide that is, we emphasize a lot on the value for money for the MPF schemes and MPF scheme members, and they have to act in the best interest of members. Obviously, there are other things like communication and also engaging through transparency and communication, and also understand the response to members' needs. So we have these charters agreed and pledged by all the 13 trustees now operating 26 schemes. And their records, they are well publicized that the trustees have agreed and pledged to follow all these requirements in the charter. And following the formulation or pledge to the charter, obviously we need to set up or formulate a number of governance principles for them to follow. So we drew reference, obviously, from the good practices such as OECD core principles of private pension regulation and also IOPS principles of private pension supervision. So we draw from these two documents and formulate the governance principles so as to provide guidance, further guidance for the trustees to follow in implementing good governance in respect of their MPF schemes. And obviously we also provide recommendations and some practical examples to the trustees in enhancing their governance standards. And obviously, each trustee will have different circumstances and situation, and we always emphasize that they have to, while making reference to the governance principle, they have to take into account their own circumstances in working out the specific measures in improving the governance arrangement in respect of their MPF schemes and looking after the interests of the scheme members. So we did these two things in the year 2018, one in May and the other in November. Now, these are the 10 governance principles we have promulgated to the trustees for their compliance. And you can see that actually there are different areas which we covered, and I mentioned the value for money principle, which is, I believe, is the most important. Act in the interest of best interest of the scheme members is also very important. So actually you could see from these 10 principles that there are different areas which trustees are required to comply with, to follow in making sure that they have a good governance framework in respect of their administration or management of the MPF schemes. And a few years later, when we have the ESG coming up, we also incorporate, issue the principles for adopting sustainable investing in investment and risk management of the MPF funds, making reference to the governance principle, because in adopting sustainable investment in the investment and risk management processes of MPF funds, obviously we look to the trustees to be very mindful of the financial risk, possible financial risk, including the ESG factors that could impact the interests of scheme members. So governance in this aspect is playing a very important role to make sure that ESG is taken into account, to make sure that the ESG impact is minimized or with a view to enhancing scheme members' best interest. And obviously, we also require the trustees to make sure that their board of directors would oversee the integration of ESG factors and assign the management to look after and adopt a very clear role and responsibility to report progress in this regard. So these are all related to the governance principle, and if they have the proper governance framework in place, all these will be taken into account when they adopt the ESG factors in their investment and risk management processes of MPF funds. So we have done these three things in the course of the last few years, and obviously, we don't stop at that. We also require the trustees, the MPF trustees, to do self-assessment. Self-assessment meaning they are required to assess if the existing governance arrangement are in adherence to the governance principle which we promulgated. So we asked him to start doing this in the year, well, actually, as a matter of fact, last year. And based on this self-assessment, we would be able to observe whether they are in compliance and whether they have implemented any measures to follow the governance principles and have taken efforts to address any problems or to continuously enhance the governance arrangement. So other than the requirement for them to do self-ratification, self-enhancement, we also make use of those self-assessment results to share the common observations which we identified in the assessments and share them with other trustees so as to make improvement to all of us, all the trustees. Obviously, for those self-assessment which do not stand up to the test, obviously we also require the MPF trustees, the concerned MPF trustees, to come up with improvement plan. And we monitor the improvement measures to see whether those shortcomings or inadequacy would be addressed promptly. The common observations we try to highlight the field, which we think is very important, is about the long tenure of independent non-executive directors. I remembered one of the speakers in the morning session mentioned about, those the NEDs in the board, they're very short term, they're elected. But in the case of Hong Kong, quite usual, the phenomenon is that the NED have been sitting on the board for quite some time, some maybe more than 10 years. We don't believe that this is healthy for the operation of the scheme and for the operation of the board in looking after the scheme members and the scheme. So in Hong Kong, we follow this 6-year rule, meaning that whoever sit on the board, they have to vacate their seat 6 years later. This is to ensure a healthy turnover, to make sure that new ideas are brought into the board, and to have a more progressive outlook for the board. So this is something which we have been asking the trustees to improve, because we noticed that quite a number of them have NED sitting on the boards for longer than 6 years, or some may even be more than 10 years. And the second observation is we noticed that they have not done enough to enhance the digital take-up. And at the moment, there are still many people relying on papers, which is time-consuming, and it is not environmental friendly. So we do ask the trustees to do more in promoting digital take-up. And the third area which we find commonly among the trustees is that the fee still need to come down. I mentioned in the earlier technical meeting that we have asked the trustees to come up with plans to further reduce fees. We are not happy with the fee percentage. Right now, on average, the trustees are charging members 1.35% fee, which we believe there's still scope for coming down. So besides the eMPF platform, which we believe would bring down the administration fee, there are other areas which we think would have scope for fee reduction, and that include investment management and sponsor fee, custodian fee, etc. So we have asked the trustees to come up with plans, 5-year plans, to gradually bring down the fee more to meet the needs of scheme members and to protect the interests of the scheme members. Now, besides self-assessment and the improvement plan, we also are doing a lot of things on enhancing the transparency of governance, because we believe that scheme members are the masters. they should be the one who are going to tell the trustees what to do. So we require the trustees to come up with annual governance report starting from the end of the last year. And those reports will have to be published on the web, and they include, for example, their own assessment of value for money, their assessment on sustainable investing strategy and implementation progress, and also their other governance matters which they should report. They should include in their annual governance report. And these governance reports require them to put them on the web, but we all know that just putting on the web is not very useful. We also do a lot of publicity. We invite the media to report on the annual governance report of the trustees and highlight what they have done and what they have not done, what they need to do. So there are a lot of things we are doing. We are also directly communicating with our scheme members, with the scheme members. Actually, the scheme members are the scheme members of the trustees, but we regulator know that as a regulator, we also have to play a part in ensuring that the scheme members know what is going on and pay attention to them. So transparency is extremely important through the publication of annual governance report. We believe that this would be transparent to the scheme members, who would then, through our publicity, through our education, through our dissemination of information, they would be woken up to look at what the trustees have been doing and try to play the part in exerting pressure on their trustees, on their schemes to do more to protect their interests, because all of them have pledged to follow the governance chapter, which is to ensure value for money of the MPF schemes and to act in the best interest of scheme members. Now, the challenges in promoting and monitoring trustees' governance is whether the conflicts are effectively identified, managed, and addressed under the trustees' governance framework. Now, this is very important because quite often than not, very often than not, the trustees have been, is part of the large group of financial services provider, and they have been given the products for them to sell to the scheme members. But so we do pay a lot of attention to this potential conflict of interest. We require them to set up mechanism for them to make sure that any such potential conflict of interest will be adequately addressed and ratified, to make sure that they don't actually work for their group company, and instead their allegiance and the duty should be owed to the MPF scheme members, not to their group companies, not to their other financial services provider. But this is something which we find is a challenge, because they are, most often than not, the trustees company is part of a big financial group of companies. So I think this is very important that we set up this governance framework to ensure that they manage, address, and ratify this sort of potential or possible conflict of interest. And of course, we also continue to engage the trustees to drive down the fees, because this is what would guarantee or in a way increase the investment return of scheme members. But of course, when you are running a business, you also have to face a lot of pressure in maintaining your revenue, your gross return, your gross profit, etc., etc. But we are pressing on with this to ensure that they are not making too much profit at the expense of the scheme members. And so that's why we have asked them to come up with a 5-year fee reduction plan. We don't exclude the possibility of legislating fee cap. As a matter of fact, we have done so in respect of the Default Investment Strategy Fund, but that is only one fund. but whether the trustees are acting in the best interest of scheme members, we have to await their plan. We are collecting their plan. So far, we have not received all, but we certainly would continue to play our role of being the regulator to help them to act in the best interest of scheme members. And obviously, we also continue to promote the employers, engage employers and to promote their digital take-up, because we believe that this would help reduce cost and enhance user-friendliness and user experience. Now, we also do training, of course, because trustees, you know, they may want to, or actually they probably wanted to do more, but maybe they don't know how to do it. So we do provide training every year, every now and then. We have symposium to help them to, you know, understand and share and exchange views with trustees on governance issues, and we also have regular training on cybersecurity, risk management. We also have seminars on governance. So that's about all I would like to share you, and I look forward to receiving your feedback on what Hong Kong, China has been doing on governance, and hope to be able to learn more from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanchi. That was very interesting. Our third speaker now, Mr. Charles Cowling, who's the President-elect of the International Actuarial Association. Charles.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be here, both as a visitor to Zimbabwe, this wonderful country. Thank you to our gracious hosts, but also as a visitor, as an actuary, to a meeting of the OECD IOPS, an organization that we as actuaries hold with particular importance because it is very relevant to the work that we do. So I'm going to take a slightly different approach. You've already heard two excellent presentations on how governance, primarily in DC schemes, can be done well in Australia and Hong Kong. I'm going to talk a bit more about DB schemes, but I will touch on DC schemes, and specifically around areas that actuaries can help, where actuaries can help both trustees or the fiduciary party, but also work with regulators. So I'm going to cover sort of three main areas. I'm going to look briefly at pension design. Then I'm going to mention a few key questions that we as actuaries believe are really important for trustees or fiduciary managers. And then I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour of how that is interpreted within three countries. And then I'll finish with some remarks about the IAA and IOPS. There's a picture on here of a monograph that we produced that Pablo kindly wrote a foreword for, which covers a fair bit of the material that I'm going to cover today. So if you want to look in more detail, then that publication is still available. I wanted to start off by just picturing pension schemes as being not black and white, not DB or DC, but actually a mixture, a spread. On the far left of this chart, you have a pure DB scheme where everything is fixed and guaranteed. The assets have no relevance to the amount of benefit that somebody will get. They're there only to provide security for members' benefits. On the far right-hand side, you've got a pure DC scheme where the assets absolutely determine benefits. But in between, you've got a mix. And in fact, a large number of pension schemes do sit in the middle somewhere. There's risk sharing, there's forms of insurance given within DC schemes. Within DB schemes, benefits might be target benefits, they might be discretionary benefits, they might be a form of best endeavours benefits, whatever you want to call it. We had a term in the UK about defined ambition, talking about what you are hoping to give. And a good example of this, in fact, is the Dutch pension system, where to a large extent, the benefits were defined. But when push came to shove, actually the small print and a lot of the documentation allowed the trustees not to give pension increases and in extreme circumstances reduce benefits. One of the challenges for us as actuaries, but also particularly for the trustees, is ensuring that members understand this. And we spend a lot of time helping our trustees explain what it is that they've got, what risks exist, and how, as trustees, they can manage those risks and communicate those risks to members. So understanding the nature of the benefit design and where the risks sit, and trying to help members understand that is a key area where actuaries have, I suggest, an important role to play. The monograph that I mentioned covered these 9 questions. And I'm going to say something very quickly about each one of them, because these are the key areas where we believe actuaries and trustees need to work very closely together. And this is primarily, obviously, a DB scheme, but has some relevance too for DC. So ensuring that what you're trying to achieve with your funding is clearly understood by everybody, not just the trustees, but by the members as well. So if you're trying to ensure that members' benefits are absolutely guaranteed, then you've got to hold enough assets to ensure that members will get all their benefits if something goes wrong. And then is your funding strategy consistent with what it is you're trying to achieve, with your objective? Is how you're funding the scheme, is the amount of money that you're paying? And also, is your investment strategy consistent with that? And then how is the financial position of the plan likely to evolve in the future? And do members understand that? You know, you might be in a big deficit position today. When might you be back in a position of some stability? What sort of risks are existing in the interim? And given all of those things you're trying to achieve, are your assumptions and methodologies, are they appropriate? In some countries, particularly the US, they're mandated. There isn't a lot of flexibility, or at least there's a lot of rules and regulations. In other countries, there's a lot of freedom. So how do the trustees choose? Or what are the risks that they're taking when they make those choices? And does everybody understand that? How does the likelihood that the employer will still continue to exist impact on what might happen to members' benefits if something goes badly wrong? Do members understand that? What conflicts of interest exist? Yan Chi mentioned that particularly within a DC scheme, but it's equally important within a DB scheme. And in fact, again, regulations vary quite dramatically. In the US, for example, the employer has more control over what goes on within the fiduciary context. In the UK, the employer has almost no control, and very material conflicts do exist, which then regulators have got to try to manage. And all of this is importantly linked to how you communicate what members are entitled to and what they might expect. And because we help trustees understand these things, we work a lot with helping them also explain that to members. So just a few comments on a few countries. Canada, typical, if somewhat complicated, DB setup with multiple jurisdictions, target benefits, multi-employer plans causing challenges, and industry-wide plans too. How do all these issues interact when you've got plans that extend across multiple employers or industries? Actuaries are heavily involved in helping trustees understand methods and assumptions and working with trustees on the suitability of the plans that they're putting in place in terms of adequacy, in terms of funding policy, and in terms of managing the risks that they've got. Wayne's already talked a lot about Australia, so I won't say a lot about this, except to say that this is an example where actuaries work quite closely in DC schemes. Australia is probably one of the better examples of countries where trustees are required to have a very high level of expertise. And expertise is key to good governance. But then Wayne's only got about 500 funds to manage, whereas poor old Brendan here has got over 70,000. So the level of expertise that you can expect is going to vary depending on what the structure is in your country. And the UK is a good example where we're trying to increase the expertise of our trustees, but recognizing that there are limits to that because of the number of plans that exist. So in the UK, and we're not alone in this, there's a big push to try to encourage consolidation and reduce the number of plans that are out there. But certainly actuaries work in the DC plans in Australia, both as potentially as directors with specific expertise around risk and insurance, but also as advisors looking at some of the key areas that the trustees are required to have skills and experience in. And then finally in the UK, we cover both DB and DC. There's a lot of encouragement in the UK from our regulator, and we work closely with our regulator in the UK around an integrated risk management framework where the trustees understand how the funding policy links with the investment policy and links with the strength of the employer that's supporting the pension scheme. And depending on... That's not good. What did I say? So in the UK, I'll just carry on and hope things recover. In the UK, there is a challenge to try to get that balance right. If you've got a very strong employer, then potentially you don't have to have so much support in terms of assets in the pension scheme to give members the same level of security. If you've got a very weak employer looking after a pension plan, then it's more important that that pension plan holds a lot of assets. We're back. That screen's not back, but they're back. So at least you can see it, even if I can't. We are working a lot with, because there's a move away from DB to DC, we're helping our our trustees and our regulators manage an end game process, manage how you will get from where we are today to a fully de-risked and bought out pension plan. Again, I've mentioned consolidation because that's key to part of our thinking in the UK. We do a lot of work around cash flow projections. We do a lot of work around mortality and longevity to help the trustees understand what's going on there. I forgot to mention also that we're doing a lot of work helping trustees around climate risks and introducing climate risk into our risk analysis for trustees to understand issues that might affect their pension arrangements. And inflation risk has been a big issue, not only in the UK, but globally too. And then just a couple of words on DC. Actuaries have been particularly engaged in the UK, helping on default investment strategies, accumulating, trying to help create investment strategies that have got appropriate levels of risk for the employees at different stages of their sort of employment cycle. As they approach retirement, do they want to take less risk? But also, particularly at the moment, trying to look at ways of maintaining some exposure to risky assets once in retirement, so that the members can still get access to the potentially higher returns from risk-bearing assets into retirement and not simply switch into bonds or fixed annuities. So we're doing quite a lot of work to help trustees in that area. So those are the areas where, very briefly, trustees could work with actuaries could work both with trustees and with regulators. At the IAA, we are very keen to work with you as an organisation. We do believe we have a lot of similar goals and that we could share our mutual international experience and our understanding of supervision of pension plans, particularly from a risk-based perspective. And that impacts on things like design, as I've said, but also around things like consumer protection and financial literacy. And again, that comes right back to how you communicate to members. And very finally, these are some of the initiatives that we're currently working on within the IAA that we'd be very happy to work more with you on in the months and years ahead, because I believe quite a lot of them, if not all of them, will have relevance not only for your own organisations, but for your trustees and for your members. So climate risk, pandemic risks, the UN's Sustainability Development Goals, artificial intelligence, water-related risks is a new one for us that we're looking at, both too much water or too little water, and what our actuaries going to be doing in the future. So we'd be very happy to come again and share more with you some of those ideas and developments that we're looking at. So thank you very much. That was all I had to cover, I think. There we are.
Thank you, Charles, and thanks to all three of you for really interesting presentations. I think it gives us all a sense of the complexity of the task, of the expectations of trustees, of the tasks they have to do, and the complexity of the task of the supervisor in ensuring that they're doing their job properly. We have plenty of time for questions. Who would like to ask one? Julia.
Thank you. I'm Julia Čelikova from National Bank of Slovakia. I have a 4 questions, but very brief. One, the Wayne mentions about cross-sectoral issues for this. My question is, we have a similar approach, but are you, or do you have this regulation in the sectoral regulation, or you have some requirement which is into some umbrella law? This is the first question. Second, how you, if it is possible, if you check the trustees or member of management as you, it's a different, is it allow to have a same person in the different institution if it in one group? If yes, if you have some requirement that they should be able to fulfill these functions properly. And last, I think that for the payout, it's a very important and maybe more complicated part in the pensions. Some people say that have a predefined mortality table. We're a little bit afraid to predefine the mortality table because we know that you have a negative selection and who will, it's depend from the how if it's possible to withdraw all the money and so on. I would like to maybe hear your opinion or maybe your that's what do you think if the regulator could take over the responsibility for the mortality table? Sorry for this, but
I was going to wait for a few questions, but you gave us a few questions, so that. But we'll take one more, and then I'll pass it to the panel.
My name is Khozaga Mengo from Botswana. I'm with the Non-Bank Financial Institutions Regulatory Authority. I'd like to pose my question to Hong Kong of China about the aspect of enhancing transparency of governance. This aspect is also covered by the International Risk Governance Council. Also about the aspect of transparency in risk governance. I'm asking Hong Kong if the aspect of enhancing transparency of governance, they use any other international standards. Thank you.
Sorry, just could you repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question? I really cannot listen.
I was asking, there's the aspect of enhancing transparency of governance in the presentation. So I'm asking, the approach by Hong Kong of China, that approach, are they using any international standard? Take, for example, the International Risk Governance Council aspects. So I'm asking, are they using any international standards for their approach? Thank you.
Got you. Well, actually, we, as I mentioned in my presentation, thank you very much for the questions. I did mention that we make reference to OECD's the core principles and also IOPS principles. So basically, these are the two international practice reference we refer to. And other than these two, I don't think we are making reference to other international practice, because we believe the OECD's and IOPS principles are already comprehensive enough for us to follow. But I think transparency is something which is very elastic, so to speak. I mean, we could. It also is very dynamic in the sense that obviously there is a limit to transparency, but we also have some common practices among the trustees which we could extract. I mentioned earlier that we do require them to do self-assessment, and we could distill from those self-assessment reports what they have uncovered or identified, and we could also distill from their annual governance report what is being disclosed. And we find that, you know, the majority are disclosing something which only one is not disclosing. Then we have very good valid reasons for us to ask that odd man out person to also disclose what the others have been disclosing. So transparency is something which is important, but as I said earlier, transparency is not just publishing something on the web, which we believe that no one will pay attention to it. We need to do corresponding publicity education, and dissemination to ensure that more and more people, as in particular, of course, the stakeholders. In this context, I'm referring to the scheme members who are affected because, you know, I must say that I'm afraid to say that many scheme members are rather inactive. So we have to kick them up and awake them to you know, notice what their trustees have been doing and whether they are acting in the best interest of them.
Okay, Julia's 3 questions very briefly. Cross-sectoral, same person in different different roles, I think, and the importance of drawdown. So, Wayne, I'll offer those to each of our 3 panelists, and they can you could pick from the a la carte. Wayne.
Yeah. So on the cross-sectional side of this, in Australia we have the primary legislation, which imposes requirements across all the different entities we regulate. So there's banking, insurance and superannuation, or pensions. The legislation's pretty prescriptive in relation to pensions, banking not so much, and sort of insurance falls somewhere in the middle. So there's very little pieces that I can't think of any legislation really that covers the whole 3, except for the accountability regime I mentioned in the presentation, which actually does extend beyond to cover the whole 3. So at that level, it's mainly within the industries, but at the same token, there is an overarching one in the context of the accountability regime that's just been introduced. When we get to the regulator, actually, a lot of the requirements, like I indicated in the slides, still apply across all the different entities. So we actually have a significant amount of cross-industry standards, but we still have individual standards for individual industries, depending on those sorts of aspects. Particularly, even with cross-industry standards, pensions are significantly different to banks. So there's always a paragraph or 2 within those cross-industry standards that tries to call out some of those issues. But generally speaking, when there's a significant divergence between the different industries, they have their own individual standards that just apply to them instead of the cross-industry.
Thank you, Julia. I must say that your question is very to the point. It is indeed one of the very tricky issue which we have to deal with. You know, the person performing different role. In this regard, I suppose you are talking about, you know, in the group of financial companies. One is asset management, the other is trustee, and the other is insurance, you know. And they have, the trustee is only a very small part of that big group of companies. So their chairman, we always find, of course, you know, the board of trustees. This happened, and we are very conscious of this. And we take particular notice of this to ensure that they instituted, you know, very good framework and mechanism to prevent conflict of interest. And so I must say that this is something which we are particularly careful, and we pay a lot of attention to it, and we would grill the trustees to and require them to come up with their plan to address this sort of possible potential conflict interest. I think the best thing is they have to let us know the mechanism to avoid any such possible conflict of interest. But of course, this could not resolve the issue of perception. I mean, people would still have the perception that, you know, since you're a group company director or managing director is sitting on the board as a chairman, is there anything that you have back in your mind, you know, controlling, you know, or tilting towards the benefits of the company rather than the members? So that's why we ask them for their mechanism or the procedure. For example, in selection of investment managers, they have to let us know their plan, their arrangement, their selection criteria, and most important of all, we have to know the performance of the funds which they have chosen. For example, in particular, when the group of financial company use their own asset manager in the MPF funds. And then we actually, these are the under the spotlight. We would look into it to see whether they perform better than any investment funds managed by outsiders. So this is, I think you raise a very important point, and that is why I said it is a challenge for us.
I'm just going to pick up on your comment about life expectancy and mortality tables, just very briefly. A couple of things I wanted to say. Firstly, you're right, selection is a big issue. It varies from country to country, but certainly in the UK, we have very different mortality tables depending on whether a member is choosing to buy an annuity, for example, or is having one bought for them with no choice. And understanding the difference between the mortality tables and the impact of selection is really important. So, you know, some countries have done a lot of work to explore that. So if you're interested, I would encourage you to look there. I also, because it prompted a thought in me, that understanding the whole issue of mortality and life expectancy is really important in a DC scheme, because life expectancy is improving. I mean, COVID aside, which caused obviously lots of heartache and tragedy and real difficulty in the last few years, in the last century around the world, life expectancy has been improving at 5 or 6 hours a day. So people's ability to finance their future income keeps changing. And people typically will underestimate how long they're going to live. So one of your challenges that you've got as regulators and trustees is to help that conversation. If people are going to rely on drawdown or rely on other sources of income, will they last? And just one final point on that. 10% of people will live 10 years longer than life expectancy. So, if you're planning that your finances will last as long as you averagely expect them to, then if you're one of the lucky 10%, you're going to be in trouble.
Charles, if you're 5 or 6 hours a day, that means our life expectancy will have increased by 15 minutes by the time the session is over compared to the beginning. Question here and a question at the back. We'll take them both together.
I'm feeling younger already as a result of that insight. So my name's Ali Khauer. I'm from the United States. I'm curious for the two regulators, or maybe the three regulators, Brendan, I'll lump you in. These efforts, I think, are very important across jurisdictions to educate trustees, and I'd like to explore a little bit what happens when things go wrong. So for us, there are three things that immediately come to mind. If a trustee is doing a bad enough job, they're pretty frequently going to be on the receiving end of either litigation or complaints and may voluntarily opt out. And otherwise, through our enforcement, sometimes when we're suing people, one of the remedies that we'll seek is a bar from them serving as a fiduciary. Again, and the third is that if they commit certain kinds of crimes, they're kind of automatically removed from being able to serve in a fiduciary capacity. I'm curious, what the mechanisms are in your jurisdictions, again, for those instances where education didn't quite get us where we needed to be.
Thanks, Ali. There was another question down towards the back.
Brian, I have a if you may allow.
I just got there. So we'll take the three, okay? So we'll take that one and then you two.
Okay, thank you. My name is Justice Youngson from the Pensions Regulatory Authority, Ghana. I have a quick question and a contribution. The question has to do with conflict of interest, especially regarding related party transactions. And I want you to throw a little more light on how you've been able to handle these things in your jurisdiction as far as some of the best practices are concerned. Two, what is the contribution? And I must say I've discussed this with a few of the senior members around, including Pablo. I think that this conference has been a very great one. We've discussed a lot of issues relating to how as regulators, we are supposed to conduct certain activities of ours, issues bordering on the people that ultimately we want to serve, i.e., the ordinary man who doesn't have a pension, or that's, even if they have, probably is not a sufficient one, issues relating to migrants, issues relating to sectorial or regional problems or challenges, the African, spectre, what exactly do we have, other jurisdictions, what have you. But in all this, I think that we might not be able to wait till the next session in Mexico before we continue the discussions. So I think that as a take-home, by close of this session formally, we should be able to identify one or two challenges or action points that we think we need to actually go ahead and pursue. And in that direction, I'll propose that between now and February, when we have the next formal session, maybe we could organize a webinar or two, draw out an outline that will include some of the best experts and ideas around, so that we can continue to discuss some of the take-homes even before we get to Mexico, and see how these bits will actually help all of us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and that contribution is definitely worth thinking about. I'm not going to make any promises, but we definitely consider it very seriously.
Yes, thank you, Brandon. Actually, my question is directed for Charles. So good afternoon, Charles. We have a very interesting situation in Mauritius, whereby sponsors, that is for occupational pension schemes, the employers, the sponsors, they seek independent advice from independent actuaries with regards to IAS 19, and thereby they are given a certain list of assumptions that can be used in order to manage their pension liabilities for DB schemes. Whereas on the other side, we have actuaries under the schemes, so we call them the scheme actuaries, who are mandated under the law to conduct prudent actuarial valuations and advise the trustees accordingly with regards to the best interests of members. So we have a sort of dichotomy with regards to the actuarial assumptions being given to the sponsors. And we find that eventually the assumptions that are provided to the sponsors, they eventually go through to the trustees, who eventually advise the scheme actuaries to go on the other set of assumptions. So my question to you is, in a practical sense, especially from a regulator's point of view, how would you suggest we can tackle this situation? Thank you.
Maybe, Charles, we'll give you that question first, and then we'll ask the regulators the other two questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that question. It's a very important example of some of the challenges that you have as regulators around conflicts of interest, and it's another example of conflicts that needs careful handling. There are good reasons why IAS 19 accounting assumptions should be different from prudential funding assumptions in running a plan. But the experience that you've described is not limited to Mauritius. I've seen that apply lots of places, particularly in areas like mortality assumptions, but not just that, inflation assumptions too. In the UK, there is a specific requirement that mortality assumptions have to be prudent, and that's a UK regulator. And you could do something similar to that on specific assumptions, because IAS 19 has an underlying requirement of best estimate without prudence built in. Whereas regulators might reasonably decide that prudence is required in certain areas, and mortality allowance for future improvements, inflation, and a number of other areas could be places that you could explicitly require trustees to justify what their prudence margin is. So that's what I'd suggest, but it's part of also having a quite a strict conflict of interest protocol and ensuring that that the management of conflicts is adhered to by all parties.
Thanks, Charles. If I could, I suppose, given I'm leading the session, I guess to make my own comments as well. It is, as you say, quite a common problem. I think one point we haven't addressed directly here, but has come out through, in particularly the presentations from Australia and Hong Kong, China, is the need to achieve the right culture, the right frame of mind for trustees. So the trustees, and this is a lot easier to say than to do, but we want the trustees to internalise their responsibilities, to internalise the interests of the members. And in an ideal world, the trustees should be ahead of the regulator in those kind of situations. But it's an enormous task, and it's the kind of task that's never finished. So the other two questions we have: what if the trustees don't do what they ought to do, if I could put it like that, and the more general issue of conflicts of interest. Yanshi, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Now, Ali, I think your question is also a very good one. What we could do, if they don't follow our advice. I must say that at the present moment, we are limited by law and not being able to do anything. Meaning, well, either we use the atomic bomb by deregistering them, which is, not an option, because you will affect a lot of scheme members. That is the atomic bomb, which we will not use, and the usual way is that we issue them requirement, supervisory letter, regulatory letter, requiring them to do this and that, and trustees being usually very obedient, they will follow. But whether they are followed substantially, partially, or half-heartedly, I mean, this is the tricky point. So we are now thinking about or working on making legislative amendment to amend the law by allowing us to have public reprimand of them. Now, this was not thinkable 20 years ago or 25 years ago when we first established the system. Because at that time, people think, the system is hated by a lot of people, so you better not add further salt into it. So, so you are afraid of affecting people's trust at that time. But now, after almost a quarter of a century, I think people are used to it and accepted, this is a system which could help them to accumulate retirement savings, and they are very concerned about what the trustees are doing. Are they protecting our interests? So we think it is now the right time to amend the law by setting a range of sanctions against this sort of not performing up to standard. Besides, well, right now it's only too extreme. Just supervisory letter, and we think that they would follow, but to what extent they followed, it is a long-drawn battle. And the other side is deregistering, which is an atomic bomb, which no one would, attempt to do unless you are doing something, well, beyond imagination. So we would like to amend the law by prescribing a range of sanctions. One thing is financial penalty, public reprimand, because we have 13 trustees, and if certain trustees are not doing well, just get out of the market. We still have, if one gone, we still have 12. If two gone, we still have 10. So it's still a sizable number of competitors in the market. So this is what we are now thinking about doing. On the conflict of interest, I think I have, in addressing or answering Julia's questions, I already talked about conflict of interest. It is a tricky thing, which we think it is a challenge, and we require the trustees to set up the mechanism, procedure, and we inspect them. We have on-site inspection, off-site monitoring to make sure that they follow the procedure to prevent and avoid this sort of conflict of interest.
Yeah, so I'll just extend on the comments from Hong Kong in the sense that I think our system is very much the same. We, instead of talking about the atomic bomb, we talk about the nuclear option. We've got another level but as well. It's a recent development, probably about 3 years ago, where we do the supervisory letter, sort of use the stick to try and encourage trustees to do the right thing. But we actually have another element now that we've got a directions power under the law. So we can direct trustees to do certain actions. So we can actually make them do things we want to do. Big downfall in that particular directions power is it doesn't extend to transferring members to other products or other funds. So initially when the legislation first came through, there was a bit of a conversation between government and APRA to try and see if we could get that particular provision. Off the back of the performance test and what we're seeing in that space, there's a potential that we might be able to get that sort of power going forward, which will definitely help us in this space. But yeah, it's going back to that idea of deregistering. We also have the ability to transfer it to an acting trustee. The question is, who's the acting trustee we can send it to? So there's always a bit of a gap in the market potentially for that element as well. But in saying all those things, I think it's really important to recognise that in the Australian context, we haven't actually got to that point. We've had a lot of trustees that have gone down this path, and a bit more like Hong Kong, they're looking for the power to name and shame in a way or make it public. We've been really active more recently to actually do it. So on the performance test, we say when somebody is not achieving performance. If somebody's actually doing the wrong thing on the broader supervisory perspective, we've been pretty open in actually going to industry and going to the media to actually make sure everybody understands what's actually happening in the space. So I still think every regulator would like to have more powers to be able to do more efficiently and quicker. But yeah, we've got a little bit more than Hong Kong, but at the same token, we're still sort of limited around the edges. And probably not too much more to say on conflicts of interest. In the Australian context, we've got a very strong conflicts of interest process and policy from a prudential standard perspective on actual conflicts of interest. We actually extend beyond that in a way. It's not as strong to perceived. So in the Australian context, there's a lot of concerns around this perceived. People have perceived conflicts of interest and how you actually manage those as well. So trustees are required to think about situations where people might think there's a conflict of interest and how they manage those as well. So we sort of extend a little bit further in that space.
Thank you. It's a little after 4:05, so unfortunately I'm going to end this session. I told you to be good. Can you join with me in thanking our panellists, please?
Thank you very much, Brendan, for leading the last session. We will now proceed in the interest of time by inviting the Commissioner of Insurance, Pensions and Provident Funds in Zimbabwe, Dr. Grace Mradzikwa, the host CEO of the Supervisory Authority in Zimbabwe, to give us her closing remarks. Let's give her a hand, please.
Thank you very much, Lloyd. A very good afternoon to you all. Thank you. Well, the curtain is closing on our 2023 Global Forum, and allow me to stand on existing protocols that have been observed already. Colleagues, allow me to express my very deep appreciation to IOPS and OECD leadership for the guidance that they provided to ensure the successful hosting of this event. The Global Forum would not have been successful had it not been for the guidance and support to the Commission in structuring the program and putting everything together. We had many calls, and I really want to appreciate the guidance. To the speakers, Mr. President, my appreciation also goes to the speakers from the different parts of the globe, really, for sharing their invaluable experiences on different topics which were covered during the last 1.5 days. I believe you will agree with me that the presentations and deliberations were very comprehensive, they were very insightful, and hence worthwhile of our attendance and listening. Thank you so much to all the speakers for dedicating time to prepare the presentations as well as attending the conference. We didn't even have one virtual presentation. I think all the presentations were in person, so I really want to appreciate that. We got a lot of insights and new knowledge from your presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, I also want to thank the participants for not only gracing us with their presence at this forum, but also for the very lively interactions during the plenary sessions. It was deliberate that we have this kind of engagement as opposed to, the usual presentations that we are used to. So it allowed us to actually have the different experiences from the different regions in one session. And statistics from the registration desk indicate that the conference drew participants from more than 40 countries. And I hope we all benefited from the diverse pool of experts with different perspectives from across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, it will also be amiss of me if I do not acknowledge the support and guidance that we received from the Minister of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion for officially opening the Global Forum, the Honorable Deputy Minister for not only gracing the forum, but for his active attendance and participation as well. The IPEC board, I want to acknowledge the chair and his fellow board members from the commission, fellow financial sector regulators. We have our central bank represented here. We have capital markets, the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as the Deposit Protection Corporation as well. Thank you very much for supporting us. To our regulated entities, who attended the forum, I really want to appreciate IOPS and OECD for the opportunity for our industry to attend the Global Forum. Well, at least now they know where we get our guidance from. And I even heard them saying, are we allowed to attend the Bali Global Forum? So I think to my colleagues from Africa, I think it is worthwhile to invite your regulated entities as well. I think we'll have very lively discussions at the Global Forum if we also have our regulated entities join us. I can assure you I'll have a couple attend the Bali conference. And I also want to appreciate, I think we have our National Social Security Authority also in attendance. Thank you so much for joining us and participating in the deliberations. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, I want to believe that there were a lot of key learnings from all the 5 thematic areas discussed during the forum, which will be very useful in informing supervisory responses and government policy in relation to the pensions industry. For me, key takeaways include the need for us to design inclusive, affordable, and sustainable pension systems. Supervisors to take evidence and risk-based approach to inform our pension coverage, including migrants. I want to appreciate the fact that, for most of us in Africa, the informal sector is larger than the formal sector. And I think we ignore this sector at our own peril. So certainly you will be seeing a lot of interventions, I think, in this area. The need to leverage technology and IT system sharing to address data integrity issues. Thank you, Hong Kong, China, for sharing your experience. I want to assure you that you'll be hearing from us so that we can engage and also share experiences, the experience that you have had. Ensuring high caliber trustees to inform and improve member outcomes. And lastly, the importance of the pension industry in socio-economic development. And thank you, Nigeria, for sharing your experience and the need to unleash the potential of the sector. So these were important key learnings for me, and I'm sure there are also other key learnings, you know, for my colleagues and friends. Lastly, I just want to remind you all that we have organized a Bush Gala dinner, I think as you have heard this evening. This is a unique experience. I'm hoping it will be a unique experience for all of you, where we are going to be able to have dinner in a therapeutic environment, natural environment, and under the stars. So for those, I think, who came with their families, please, you are all invited to bring your families along. For tomorrow, we are arranging a sunset cruise on this mighty Zambezi River. You will see, for those who will be available, the best sunset ever. The best sunset ever is on the mighty Zambezi River. So it's also a good opportunity for you to appreciate our wildlife. If the wildlife indulges, you will be able to see elephants swimming, you'll see hippopotamus, crocodiles, and other animals that will be coming to drink water or at the river. Allow me, friends and colleagues, to thank you once again for coming to Zimbabwe, and I wish you journey messes back to your respective destinations. To the technical committee members, God willing, we will meet at the next meeting scheduled for February in Mexico City. And we will also meet at the Global Folder. Delegates will see you definitely in Bali, Indonesia. So Bali, please prepare. Safe journey, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I will now invite Mr. Brendan Kennedy, the chair of the IOPS Technical Committee and CEO of Pensions Authority Ireland, to come and give his closing remarks. Let's give him a hand. Let's give him a hand as he's coming through.
Thank you. I will be brief. Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a very good day and a half. A large number of interesting contributions and really good involvement from all attendees, which is always a good sign. And I'm echoing what you've just said, Commissioner. There's so much to think about, having heard about lots of different subjects, and I'm not going to repeat it. But our objective in these events, IOP's objective, is to give you something to think about. It's to, you know, you won't learn everything there is to know about a given subject, but we hope we've given you food for thought, something that you can go back to your desk, hopefully not till Monday, but when you're next back at your desk, you think, that's a good idea, I need to follow it up, and IOPS is available to give you more information for the resources to find out more about these issues. So what I would like to do now is simply to thank so many people. Madam Commissioner, I'd like to thank you and all the staff of the Insurance and Pension Commission. It's been a wonderful experience being here, and it's been wonderful to have had the opportunity. I'd like to thank all of our presenters. I'd like to thank all of you as attendees. I have to thank the IOPS and OECD Secretariat for the work they did as part of the preparation for this meeting. I'd like you to thank on our behalf the Minister and Deputy Minister, and I think it would also be good to thank the hotel staff who've made us all so comfortable today. So I too will see you in Bali.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. And last but not least, we would want to invite Dr. Pablo Antolin, the head of Insurance and Pensions Unit, Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Africa, or ECD. Let's give him a hand as well as he's coming through.
Um, Dear Grace and dear staff from the Insurance and Pension Commission, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much for your welcome and your warmth. It's really nice. And thank you, you all, the audience, for coming here and share with all of us your views, your questions, and your knowledge. At the end of the day, as Brendan said, this is the purpose, to exchange experiences. We have this opportunity of sharing all these experiences, of learning from each other, and to interact in person. This is very useful. I've seen a lot of people asking questions to other jurisdictions of how do you do that? Can you send us information and all of that? This is what all these type of events are for. And of course, this allow us, as Brendan said, to think, but and to learn, and to use this knowledge and this way of thinking to improve our pension systems and the well-being of our population. Hopefully, this is a goal. I hope to see you all soon in any place in the world. Please remember the OECD remains available for any help that we might be able to provide you. And please do not hesitate to contact us, to contact Darius, to contact Nina for anything we can help you with. And thank you very much. This is all for me.
The final announcement, thank you, is about the gala dinner tonight, or the dinner.